this is now the fourth time I'm recording this because I keep forgetting a bunch of things to talk about. So I'm not going to do an in-depth review of the HDO2 goggles because there's a lot of those already on YouTube. I don't need to do that. I'm going to discuss my experience differences between the Orcas and the HDO2s and just explain what I see. And I'm going to start with the video quality and the image quality first because this video is going to be almost entirely talking, and so I'll get that out of the way at the beginning. So what I've shown you here is two pictures, one from the HDO2 and one from the Orcas. I have attempted to take these pictures and make them as close to real life as possible between these two goggles. And so that includes the vignetting of the corners, which is the first thing I'll talk about, which both these goggles have, including the DJI goggles, which is so frustrating. I don't know why they don't make the lenses just a little bit bigger on the Orcas and the DJI goggles. The Orcas and the Fatsharks. Maybe there's some engineering reason behind it. Whatever it is, both goggles, for me, for my eyes, they don't vignette, they don't actually darken or blur the corners or anything. They just chop the corners right off, and it's very annoying, but it's also not a big deal. I'm really nitpicking. Now, looking at the lenses, starting with the lenses of the Fatsharks versus the Orcas, the lens on the Fatsharks have almost no rim. You almost can't distinguish where the lens ends and starts when you look through the lenses with your eye. On the Orcas, you see kind of a white ring reflection around the edge of the lens, and that is a reflection, as far as I know, off the actual ring of the lens itself. This is really not significant, but I'm pointing it out because it's really hard to find differences between these two goggles to even discuss if there's any meaningful differences between the two. But hey, that's there if you want to bank on that very, very minor, almost insignificant issue. Now, the Fatsharks have this nifty focus adjustment per eye. I'm not the best person to review that aspect because I just thankfully have very good vision and my eyes have a great dynamic range, so I can focus on a lot of things. But it is really nice to have that focus adjustment, and even on my eyes, I have astigmatism on one of my eyes, so I could get maybe a teensy bit better image clarity maybe, but then once I went back and forth, I really couldn't tell a difference between the two. So for me, it doesn't really help, but it's really nice to have. It's a really nice little feature, and I do wish that the Orcas had it, just because why not? If it's possible, it would be nice if it was built in. As from what I understand, Orca actually had it in their earlier goggles and actually removed it because people didn't find the benefit of it. And one thing I would also point out is that the Fatsharks can't use diopters anymore, whereas the Orcas can. And from what I understand, there are some people that have visual ranges outside the range of the focus adjustment on the HDO2s, so they actually can't use the HDO2s because they can't give it a diopter to adjust. So if that's something, if you're in that category, you've already made your decision. And looking at the screen now, so the field of view of the Orcas is a little bit bigger. There's also a slight more of a pincushion effect to the Orcas, and so the screen looks a little curved, which I personally like and prefer. But again, this is not a significant thing to harp on. The field of view is bigger, like I said. The field of view is bigger on the Orcas, absolutely, definitely. But nobody's going to be upset with the field of view of either goggles. I mean, both of them are massive, much bigger than I even care to have. It's fantastic. The field of view is great, and the visual ability of seeing the screens is great. Now, looking at the actual picture quality between these two, there is some very slight variation. So the Orcas have this OSD where you can adjust a bunch of things. You can adjust the brightness, contrast, and the luminance, and all this other stuff. And the Fatsharks don't have any OSD. They only have a brightness and contrast adjustment, just how all the previous Orcas had before them. Now, that means that you can adjust the Orcas a little bit more than the Fatsharks, but I have actually adjusted the Orcas to my bestest of ability, and I still think the Fatsharks have just the ever so slightest nicer looking image, just ever so slightly. It's really actually hard to tell in real life also, but it is just ever so slightly richer and higher contrast looking. And I think a lot of that has to do with the way the image is processed, because both of these goggles are using the same screen from the same manufacturer, so the image processor is probably different between the two. And what I found on the Orcas, just by comparing these two, is that when you switch the channel and you go to that menu where you see the switch channel thing, you get kind of the screen is not black on the Orcas. It becomes black after a moment, which tells me that there's probably some image processing going on, whereas on the Fatsharks, it's black. It's black. It's so black it's off. It looks like it's off. It's like an OLED screen. And a lot of you are probably watching this on an AMOLED screen phone anyway, so you can actually see the various contrast differences between the two images that I'm showing you. And I chose to show an image because it was the most controllable way I could show you the differences between these two goggles. Aside from that, which is pretty much insignificant, it's really hard to tell that contrast and richness difference. The Orcas look like the screen has just a super, at least the version I have a super slight tinge of greenish blue to them, just so slight, and it's all software, so they can probably add a hue adjustment and that would be fixed. So again, insignificant to discuss. All in all, I've spent 6 minutes talking about something that is not enough of a difference to make anybody's decision. Like, I don't think anybody is going to be concerned or upset or anything about the ability to see the screens and the optics and the image quality and everything between these two goggles. That is a totally insignificant thing, and I recommend you don't even consider it. Moving on to the actual goggle and the experience of using the goggle itself. So the fit of the HDO2s is not quite as good as the Orcas for my face, but that's because I have a huge nose. All Fatsharks have kind of ridden high on my nose and kind of given me a cut line in my nose, which is how people know that I've been flying. And so because I have a huge nose, the Orcas just fit my face better. Even with no foam on the Orcas, it just fits my face a little bit better. So if you have a big nose, you're going for the Orcas, you're not going for the HDO2s. I do like the leatherette kind of cut finish on the HDO2s, and there are some slight finishes here and there about the Fatshark goggles that do show their pedigree and their history of having made many goggles, even though the vast majority of them have been identical. But hey, they have made a lot of goggle products, and this is Orca's first product, and they've done a fantastic job on their first product to rival Fatshark's flagship product at this point. Aside from that fit aspect, the fan is really the most significant factor for me between these two goggles, and is the main reason, or the only reason, why I will keep the HDO2s in my bag at all times whenever I go on a job or flying or whatnot, because the fan in the Orcas just is not powerful enough to get the condensation off the screen if you're in an environment that's just a little nippy, a little bit cooler. And so when you put the goggles on your face, you get some condensation from the heat of your eyes or face heating up the air or heating up the lenses, and then you get air that condenses, or moisture that condenses on the lenses, so you can't actually see things that clearly. Now the fan on the HDO2s is a lot more powerful than the previous Fatshark goggles, which I'm thankful for, but there's also no fan adjustment, and the blowing of the air is so high it actually dries out my eyes. But I would much rather have that than the inability to actually see where I'm going and have condensation on my lens. It is an annoying issue, and it's something that I mentioned before. I've talked to Orca about it, and maybe they can come up with a fix, maybe they can't. I'm not so sure what's happening on that front, but that is really the only defining factor that I would say the Fatshark has on top of the Orcas. The DVR on the Fatsharks is the same as before. It's total garbage compared to the Orcas, just complete trash. And the roadmap of where the Orca is going is much more promising. I mean, they have so much processing power in this thing. They have so much abilities. They have so many things that I can't discuss that they have planned for in the future that I would, if I'm spending the money, I'm definitely spending it on the Orcas just because of the roadmap. Because Fatshark, while they've made a lot of headroom in showing us that they can actually do good things if they have pressure, they also have a history of not really listening too well to their user base, which is really annoying to me. But yeah, those are the differences between these two goggles. Neither one is a bad product. Obviously, both of them are fantastic. They're both flagship products. Talking about the value proposition of going with this highest end analog product, I would say if you're going to get a pair of analog goggles, you either get the Eachine goggles, which is the lowest end, I think it's like $70 or $75, or you get the highest end. I don't think anything in the middle is worth it unless you're buying like a used pair of Dom V3s for like $150. Then it's worth it. But other than that, there is just no point in spending $200, $300 on something in the middle range when you get so much more for your money at the top end. I know these things are like $600, but this is not something that you change off. You probably you may not ever buy another pair of analog goggles if you own these. And with that, on that note, let's transition to discussing about the value proposition and what's been happening with the DJI goggles. So now moving over to the DJI goggles. I was using these goggles, I mean, they sent them to me early on, and I've been using them for a while now, and they have been a lot better now than they were originally. And when I first reviewed them, the software was incomplete, things just didn't function properly, and it was still darn good. The physical issues with the DJI system are still there. The screens are enormous. You can't see the whole screen. Nobody can see the whole screen when you look through the optics. You can't see the OSD and your flying screen at the same time. Thankfully, they give you the ability to actually shrink the video feed coming off the quad so that you can actually see the whole thing. And I have mine shrunk to the minimum because it just I can't see the thing. I do hope that in the future they give you the ability to actually move the OSD numbers around so they can get closer to the actual visual field so you can actually see what's going on. Also, the goggles are a little bit larger, which isn't really that big of a deal, and they fit exactly nobody. Aside from that, there is no other actual physical issue I have with the goggles. Now, talking about analog on the DJI goggles, that is something new, and I hounded them for the longest time, begged them to allow the ability for the goggles to pick up analog, because then the decision is very easy, because you might as well just get the digital one and you could do both analog and digital, but they didn't allow that. But gracefully, they have updated the firmware to make analog actually usable. However, that being said, there are a very limited number of ways to adapt a module to the goggles themselves, which is a little bit annoying. This is the URUAV one, which I believe is a Hack and Model relative company, so it's hard to kind of trust the components on there. But it does have a 6S power management module on there so that you can actually plug in a 6S battery, which is fantastic. I don't know why all these things don't take all S's. They should take even more than 6S, just because it's so easy to put a switching power management module in there. But in order to use the analog at this point, you have to go into a menu and then a sub menu and then a subsetting of that sub menu in order to get the analog feed. And if you happen to touch a button anywhere, you lose your analog feed instantly, and you have to go through all the menus again to get it back. And so they have implemented analog, but it's almost as if they did it in a way to just allow you to test things, not actually use. Now, it's obviously usable. You can definitely use it. People are using it, and the experience of it is totally fine. It's great. The screen quality of the Orcas and the Fatsharks is definitely a good step above the screen quality of the DJI goggles, but it's also no slouch. The analog video usability of them is great. The latency is non-existent, and it works fine. It's just the issue of they haven't made like an analog mode entirely. It's just like a menu and then a sub menu. They might change that in the future because it's all in software and they can't just update things to make that work. Now, after all of that, after all that being said, let's discuss the value proposition of digital versus analog yet again. So before even talking about that aspect, I will point out that the CADX Vista unit that came out with the DJI stuff, which I won't talk about much, but it's great, works fantastic, and that existing has made all the DJI stuff far more approachable and usable. It actually fits in your quad, which is phenomenal, and it's also a little bit cheaper. Now, the goggles, the DJI goggles, I think they're like $450 now, just the goggles, so it is it's cheaper than getting the Orcas or the Fatsharks. But then you have to buy the Vista unit or the Air unit or something. You're going to be spending a minimum of $140, $150 per quad just to run the DJI system. Now, that may or may not change in the future, that I can't really discuss, but we're not told that. So we can't really base our decision based on that. We only know what we know today. That may improve in the future, but for the most part, the DJI system will ultimately end up costing you more, and the ecosystem for analog is much broader, and the versatility of analog is much better. However, the digital signal quality today with the latest updates and whatnot is fantastic. It's fantastic. I mean, I can't even believe how fantastic the signal retention and the quality of everything is. I haven't changed my antennas. I've done nothing. I haven't done the 1200 milliwatt hack or anything. And the DJI system just works. So the other thing I would mention is that it is not impossible for DJI or somebody, or DJI, clearly DJI has partnered with companies. It's not impossible for DJI to partner with a company to make a receiver module for Fatsharks and the Orcas. And if that happens, the experience of using the Orcas or the Fatsharks is significantly better than using the DJI goggles themselves, just mainly because of the fit and the screen and the optics, and they're just better set up. I mean, they just work better. We're more used to them. They function nicer when you look through the screens. You can see everything. Everything is just nicer. So if that happens, the experience of using the DJI system on one of those top-end analog goggles is going to be better. I can absolutely understand if people choose the DJI system over the analog goggles, because at this point the goggles are cheaper and you get to do both analog and digital with a little bit of hacking here and there, and the digital is just fantastic. So yes, let's leave it at that, and you can ask me whatever you want about all this stuff, and floss your teeth, and I'm so dry from talking so much. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.